Look at that. My hand barely fits around it. This single zucchini, pulled from my garden this morning, weighs just over 4 pounds. It is not a freak accident. It is not some special hybrid seed that cost me $20 a packet, and it is certainly not the result of some miracle fertilizer that comes in a shiny bag with a cartoon vegetable on the front. I grew this, and I grow ones like it every single summer, using 3 specific techniques that most backyard gardeners either ignore completely or have never been told in the first place. The first time I saw a zucchini this size, I was standing in my neighbor Mrs. Kowalska's kitchen about 12 years ago. She had one sitting on her counter that looked more like a small club than a vegetable, and I asked her, point blank, what she fed that thing. She smiled, the way she always does when I ask a question that reveals how much I still do not know, and she said 3 words. Those 3 words changed everything, and I am going to give them to you, along with the other 2 tips right now. The reason most people never learn how to grow truly enormous zucchini is honestly kind of annoying. It is not because the knowledge is complicated. It is not because it requires expensive equipment or rare inputs. It is because the entire home gardening industry, the seed catalogs, the fertilizer companies, the garden center racks packed with potions and powders, they all benefit from you believing that bigger vegetables require more stuff. More bottles, more bags, more proprietary blends with names like Mega Bloom and Monster Fruit. They want you to think that the secret is something you have to buy from them every single season. But the real secret, the one Mrs. Kowalska learned from her grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother in a small village in the old country, costs almost nothing and has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. It is so simple that it is almost embarrassing that I did not figure it out myself after 15 years of gardening. And I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Probably just another internet gimmick, right? Some trick that works 1 time out of 10 if you are lucky. I completely understand your skepticism. I felt exactly the same way until I tried it, with my own hands, in my own raised beds, and watched my zucchini plants absolutely explode with fruit the size of my forearm. Let me ask you something. Do you know that feeling, that specific, slightly defeated feeling you get around the middle of July, when you walk out to your zucchini patch and you see the same thing you saw last year? The leaves are big and green, sure, maybe even huge. The plant itself looks healthy, but the actual zucchini, the reason you planted the thing in the first place, they are small. They are sparse. You get maybe 3 or 4 that are worth picking, and the rest are these skinny little fingerlings that start to rot at the blossom end before they ever get anywhere. Or worse, you get a flush of decent ones, and then the plant just stops. It puts out a few more sad little fruits. They turn yellow and shrivel up, and by August you are looking at a spent, powdery mildew-covered mess that you are ready to rip out and throw in the compost pile. Hand on heart, how many of you have a garden that looks exactly like that right now, or did last summer? I know I did for years. Years of trying every piece of advice I found online. More water, less water, special zucchini fertilizer with a higher phosphorus number, Epsom salt sprayed on the leaves. I tried it all, and every single year, the result was the same handful of mediocre squash while Mrs. Kowalska 2 doors down was quietly giving away arm-sized zucchinis to everyone on the block because she could not possibly eat them all. It was honestly maddening. Before I tell you what finally worked, let me walk you through the usual fixes that most people try and fail with, because understanding why they fail is the key to understanding why the right method succeeds. The first thing people reach for is fertilizer. And not just any fertilizer, but a high-phosphorus bloom booster, the kind marketed for tomatoes and peppers and flowering plants. The logic seems sound. Phosphorus promotes flowering and fruiting, so more phosphorus should mean more fruit, bigger fruit. So you buy the bottle with the big middle number on the NPK ratio. You mix it up. You drench your zucchini plants and you wait. And what happens? You get a burst of lush green growth, maybe even a few extra flowers, and then the plant puts out fruits that start to develop and then suddenly stop, turning soft and brown at the tip. Why? Because zucchini, unlike a tomato or a pepper, is not limited by phosphorus in almost any normal garden soil. What it is desperately, ravenously hungry for, more than almost any other vegetable you grow, is nitrogen and potassium, and in very specific ratios. When you blast it with phosphorus, you are essentially force-feeding it the one thing it already has enough of, while starving it of what it actually needs to build those massive, dense, heavy fruits. It is like trying to build a brick wall by ordering 10 times more mortar, but forgetting to buy any more bricks. It just does not work. The second common fix is the calcium spray, or the Epsom salt foliar feed. You see this recommended constantly, usually to prevent blossom end rot, that brown leathery patch on the bottom of the fruit. People assume that if the fruit is rotting at the end, it must need more calcium, just like a tomato. So they mix up a solution, they spray it on the leaves, they feel proactive, and then the same thing happens again. The fruits rot. Here is the thing about blossom end rot in zucchini. It is almost never caused by a lack of calcium in the soil. It is caused by inconsistent watering that prevents the plant from transporting the calcium that is already there. The calcium is present, locked in the soil particles, but the plant's vascular system, the internal plumbing that moves nutrients around, shuts down when the soil gets too dry between waterings. Spraying calcium on the leaves does nothing because calcium does not move from the leaves to the fruits in any significant way. You are treating a symptom with a solution that cannot reach the problem, like painting the outside of a pipe to fix a leak on the inside. And the Epsom salts, the magnesium sulfate. Magnesium can help with chlorophyll production, sure, but if your soil is not actually deficient in magnesium, and most garden soils are not, you are just adding salts that can build up and interfere with the uptake of other nutrients. You are solving a problem you likely do not have while creating new ones you definitely do not want. The third and most destructive fix, the one that honestly makes me cringe when I see it recommended, is the aggressive pruning approach. The theory goes that if you remove a bunch of leaves, the plant will redirect its energy into the fruit. So people go out with their pruners and they strip off half the foliage, leaving the poor zucchini plant looking like a plucked chicken, and they wait for the giant zucchinis to appear. And what happens? The plant goes into shock. It needs those leaves to photosynthesize, to literally create the sugars and carbohydrates that become the building blocks of the fruit. Removing a significant portion of its leaf area is like asking a factory to double its output, while you board up half the windows and shut down a third of the assembly line. The plant panics. It stops producing. The fruits that were developing stall out. And to make matters worse, all those open cuts you made with your pruners are now entry points for disease. Powdery mildew, bacterial wilt, squash vine borers, they all find those wounds and move right in. You have weakened the plant at exactly the moment it needed all its strength. So those are the dead ends. The bloom boosters, the calcium sprays, the butchering of healthy leaves. I spent years running down every single one of those paths, and every single one led me to the same disappointing patch of small, sad zucchinis. And then that day in Mrs. Kowalska's kitchen, I finally just asked her. I had been too proud to ask before, honestly. I wanted to figure it out myself, to prove my own gardening chops. But standing there looking at that monstrous green club on her counter, I swallowed my pride and said, "Okay, what is the secret?" And she looked at me, wiped her hands on her apron and said, plain as day, the 3 words that I am about to tell you. The first tip, the one that Mrs. Kowalska whispered to me like it was a state secret, is this. Hand pollinate. Every single morning. That is it. That is the hidden, ancient, almost forgotten secret that her grandmother passed down. Hand pollination. I know exactly what you are thinking. You are thinking bees exist. Pollinators exist. My garden is full of flowers. I see bees buzzing around all the time. Surely they are taking care of the pollination for me. And you are partially right. Bees do exist. But here is what nobody tells you about zucchini plants. They are not like tomatoes, which have perfect flowers containing both male and female parts, and can pollinate themselves with just a little vibration from the wind or a bumblebee's buzz. Zucchini plants produce separate male and female flowers. The male flowers appear first, usually in a big flush on long, thin stems. The female flowers come a little later, and you can identify them instantly because they have a tiny baby zucchini already formed at the base of the flower, right behind the petals. That baby zucchini is the ovary, and it will only develop into a full fruit if a grain of pollen from a male flower is physically transferred to the sticky central stigma inside the female flower. If that transfer does not happen perfectly and completely, the baby zucchini simply yellows, shrivels, and falls off. That is it. That is the entire story. Now bees can do this job, and sometimes they do. But zucchini flowers open at dawn, and they are only fully receptive for a few hours in the early morning. By midday the flowers begin to close, and by afternoon they are often completely shut, never to reopen. If the bees in your neighborhood are busy with other flowers, or if it is a cool, cloudy morning when bees are less active, or if you simply do not have a high enough population of squash bees, the specialist native bees that are the most efficient pollinators of cucurbits, then your female flowers are going to miss their window. They will open, wait for a suitor that never arrives, and then close up and abort the fruit. And you will walk out to your garden, see those tiny yellowing zucchinis, and assume you have a disease or a nutrient problem, when in reality, the plant simply never got properly pollinated. This happens far more often than most gardeners realize. I would estimate, based on my own close observation over many seasons, that in an average suburban garden without a managed honeybee hive nearby, only about 60 to 70% of female zucchini flowers get fully pollinated by insects alone. That means 30 to 40% of your potential harvest is just dropping off the plant, and you are blaming yourself for something that is not your fault. Or rather, it is your fault, but only because you are not doing the one simple thing that would fix it. So here is exactly how you hand pollinate, step by step. You go out to your garden in the early morning, ideally before 8 o'clock, when the flowers are wide open and the pollen is fresh and fluffy. You bring nothing with you but your fingers. You look for a male flower, which will be on a long, slender stem with no baby fruit at the base. You gently pluck that male flower from the plant. You peel away the petals, leaving you with a little wand, the central stamen covered in bright yellow pollen grains. It looks like a tiny golden Q-tip. Then you find a female flower with the baby zucchini at the base, and you gently, carefully, take that pollen-covered stamen and dab it directly onto the orange, lobed stigma in the center of the female flower. You want to make sure you transfer pollen to every lobe of that stigma, because each lobe corresponds to a row of seeds inside the developing fruit, and if a row of seeds is not pollinated, that side of the zucchini will not develop properly. You will get a lopsided, stunted fruit. So be thorough. Swirl that little pollen wand around gently, making contact with every surface. One male flower can pollinate 2 or 3 female flowers if you are careful. And then you are done. That is the whole process. It takes maybe 30 seconds per plant. The first morning I did this, I felt a little ridiculous, honestly. I was crouched in my garden at 6:45 in the morning, still in my bathrobe, playing bee with a stripped flower. but I did it to every open female flower on my 4 zucchini plants. And about a week later, I walked out and saw something I had never seen in my garden before. Every single baby zucchini that I had pollinated was swelling, dark green, glossy, and growing so fast I could almost swear I saw the change from morning to evening. No yellowing, no shriveling, no aborted fruits. Every single one was developing. The difference was not subtle. It was absolute. I went from a plant that was setting maybe half its fruit to a plant that was setting every single fruit I pollinated. 100% success rate. And when a zucchini plant sets fruit successfully, when it is not constantly aborting its babies, it triggers a hormonal response in the plant to keep producing more flowers. The plant senses that conditions are favorable for reproduction, and it doubles down. More male flowers, more female flowers, more fruit. It becomes a positive feedback loop. Hand pollination does not just save the fruits you have, it signals the plant to make more of them. Now, there is one critical caution here, one mistake I made in my second year that I need to warn you about. Do not, under any circumstances, use a paintbrush or a cotton swab for this. I know some gardening books recommend it. They say to use a small artist's brush to collect pollen and transfer it. I tried that, thinking it would be more efficient. Let me pollinate more flowers with less damage to the male blooms. And what I found is that a dry brush does not hold the pollen grains well. They are too light and fluffy, and they just fall off. And if the brush is even slightly damp, the pollen grains clump together and become useless. Pollen is delicate. It is a living thing, and it needs to be transferred directly, fresh, without any intermediary that can damage or trap it. Your fingers, or the stripped male stamen itself, are the only tools you should ever use. The male flower is a perfect, biodegradable, single-use pollen delivery device that the plant produced specifically for this purpose. Use it as designed. The second tip builds directly on the first, and it is something I stumbled onto by accident while trying to solve a completely different problem. You see, even after I mastered hand pollination and was getting near perfect fruit set, I noticed that my zucchinis were still not reaching the truly monstrous sizes that Mrs. Kowalska's did. They were good, they were plentiful, but they were not giants. I was getting fruits that were maybe a pound, pound and a half, perfectly respectable, but not the 4-pound clubs I was chasing. And I could not figure out what was missing. I was pollinating, I was watering consistently, I had decent soil. What else could there possibly be? The answer came to me in late June, during a particularly hot, dry spell, when I was out watering my garden, and I noticed something about the zucchini plants. The soil around the base of the stems was dry, cracking a little on the surface. I had been watering deeply, or so I thought, but the water was running off to the sides, not soaking down into the root zone. The plants were surviving, but they were not thriving. They were living in a state of constant low-grade water stress, and I did not even realize it. Here is what I learned, and what I now consider the second non-negotiable tip for giant zucchinis. You must bury a deep watering reservoir directly at the root zone of each plant. Not a drip line, not a soaker hose laid on the surface, not a sprinkler that wets the leaves and invites powdery mildew. A physical reservoir buried in the soil that delivers water directly to the roots where the plant can access it continuously and deeply. The way I do this, and the way I want you to try, is almost laughably simple and costs nothing. Take a 1-gallon plastic nursery pot, the kind that shrubs and perennials come in from the garden center. You probably have a stack of them sitting behind your shed right now. If you do not, ask a neighbor, they will be happy to give you some. Bury that pot in the soil about 6 to 8 inches away from the base of your zucchini plant, with the rim of the pot sitting about an inch above the soil surface. You want the bottom of the pot to be at least 8 to 10 inches deep, down in the root zone. Fill the bottom of the pot with a few inches of coarse gravel or small stones, just to prevent the soil from washing up into the pot and clogging it. Then when you water, you do not water the surface of the soil at all. You fill that buried pot. You fill it to the brim, let it drain down, fill it again. The water flows out the drainage holes at the bottom of the pot, directly into the deep soil layers where the zucchini's taproot and major feeder roots are waiting for it. Why does this matter so much for size? Because zucchini plants are not shallow-rooted. A mature zucchini plant can send roots down 3 feet or more in search of water and nutrients. But the vast majority of the feeder roots, the fine root hairs that actually absorb water and dissolved minerals, are concentrated in the top 12 to 18 inches of soil. When you water from the surface, even if you water slowly and deeply, a significant portion of that water evaporates before it ever reaches those feeder roots. On a hot sunny day, you can lose 30 to 40% of the water you apply to simple evaporation from the soil surface. That is water you paid for, water you spent time applying, just vanishing into the air. But when you deliver the water 10 inches underground, there is almost no evaporative loss. The water stays in the soil, available to the roots for much longer. The soil around the root zone stays consistently moist, not swinging between saturated and bone dry. And consistent moisture is the single most important factor, bar none, in growing large, dense, fast-developing zucchini fruits. A zucchini fruit is something like 95% water by weight. If the plant does not have a constant, uninterrupted supply of water, it simply cannot pack on the mass. It will stall, it will produce smaller fruits, and the fruits it does produce will be less dense, more spongy, with a shorter shelf life. I bury one of these reservoir pots next to every single zucchini plant in my garden now. It takes 5 minutes at planting time. I also add a second refinement that I want you to do. Before you bury the pot, take a permanent marker and draw a line on the inside of the pot at the 1-inch mark from the bottom. Then, when you water, add a liquid fertilizer concentrate to the water in the pot, but only up to that line. The fertilizer I use, and the one I recommend without any brand attachment whatsoever, is a simple fish emulsion or seaweed extract, both of which are widely available and inexpensive. The key is that they are gentle, they will not burn roots, and they provide a broad spectrum of micronutrients along with the primary nitrogen and potassium that zucchini crave. I fertilize through the reservoir pot once a week, at half the strength recommended on the bottle. The rest of the time, I fill the pot with plain water. This delivers a slow, steady trickle of nutrition directly to the roots, exactly mimicking the way a plant would encounter nutrients in rich, deep, undisturbed soil. There is no feast and famine cycle. There is no flushing of nutrients past the root zone from heavy surface watering. The plant just eats and drinks whenever it wants, and it rewards you by growing like a monster. I will tell you the exact recipe I use for the fertilizer water, because I know you will want specifics. In a 2-gallon watering can, I mix 2 tablespoons of fish emulsion and 1 tablespoon of unsulfured blackstrap molasses. The molasses is not for the plant directly. It feeds the beneficial bacteria and fungi in the soil around the roots, the microscopic herd that breaks down organic matter and makes nutrients available to the plant in forms it can absorb. Healthy soil life means healthy roots, and healthy roots mean massive fruits. I pour this mixture into the reservoir pot, let it drain down, and then follow it with plain water to push it deeper into the soil profile. The whole routine, hand pollinating in the morning and filling the reservoir pots, takes me maybe 10 minutes a day for a dozen zucchini plants. 10 minutes, and the return on that investment is measured in pounds of food. Now the third tip. This one is the most counterintuitive, the one that made me argue with Mrs. Kowalska when she first suggested it. I actually told her I thought she was pulling my leg. She was not. The third tip is this. You must harvest your zucchinis earlier than you think you should, and you must harvest them constantly, ruthlessly, without mercy. I know, this sounds completely backwards. The whole goal is giant zucchinis, and now I am telling you to pick them early. But hear me out, because this is the piece of the puzzle that finally made everything click into place. A zucchini plant has one biological mission in life, and only one. It wants to reproduce. It wants to produce mature fruits with viable seeds inside them, so that those seeds can fall to the ground and grow new plants next season. That is the entire point of the plant's existence, from an evolutionary perspective. The fruit is just a vessel for the seeds. The plant does not care if you want a giant zucchini for your grill. It cares about making seeds. When you leave a zucchini on the plant past a certain point, when the fruit begins to mature and the seeds inside start to harden and develop their seed coat, the plant receives a hormonal signal that says, "Mission accomplished. I have successfully reproduced. I can slow down now." And it does. Flower production drops off. New fruit set declines. The plant begins to shift its energy from producing new fruits to maturing the existing ones, filling those seeds with stored energy for the next generation. It is a biological off switch, and once it is flipped, it is very hard to flip back. But if you harvest the fruits when they are still young, still tender, still with immature seeds that are soft and white and barely formed, the plant never receives that signal. It thinks, "I have not succeeded yet. I need to keep trying." And it keeps pumping out flowers and setting new fruit, over and over, in a desperate, glorious attempt to fulfill its reproductive destiny. Your job, as a gardener who wants giant zucchinis, is to exploit this biological drive for all it is worth. So here is the harvesting rule I follow, and I want you to adopt it exactly. You harvest every zucchini when it reaches between 6 and 8 inches in length. Not 10 inches, not 12 inches, not when it looks like something you could use as a baseball bat. 6 to 8 inches, which for most varieties is about the length of your hand from wrist to fingertip. At this size, the seeds are still undeveloped, the skin is still tender and does not need peeling, and the flavor is at its absolute peak. But more importantly, from the plant's perspective, the fruit has been removed before it could mature. The off switch stays firmly in the off position. The plant keeps producing. Now you might be thinking, wait, if I harvest at 6 to 8 inches, how do I ever get a giant zucchini? The answer is that you do not harvest every single fruit at that size. You let 1 or 2 fruits per plant, and only 1 or 2, continue growing past that point. You select the best looking, most vigorous fruits on the healthiest plants, and you let them go. You keep harvesting everything else ruthlessly at the 6 to 8 inch stage. The plant, still in full production mode because you are removing most of its fruits young, pours all of its photosynthetic energy into those 1 or 2 remaining fruits. All the sugars, all the water, all the nutrients that would have been divided among a dozen developing fruits are now concentrated into just a few. And those few fruits swell to absolutely enormous proportions. This is exactly what Mrs. Kowalska did. She did not let every zucchini on her plants grow to 4 pounds. She harvested most of them at normal size for eating fresh, and she let 1 or 2 per plant become the giants, the ones she would use for stuffed zucchini boats or zucchini bread or just showing off to her neighbors. The plant could support that because it was still in full production mode, still making flowers, still setting fruit, still thinking it had not yet succeeded. The giant zucchinis were a byproduct of the plant's continued effort, not a sign that the plant was finishing its life cycle. This is a completely different mindset from the typical gardener, who lets the first few zucchinis get huge, and then wonders why the plant stops producing in August. The plant stopped because you let it complete its mission. You let those first fruits mature, the seeds hardened, the hormonal signal went out, and the plant began to shut down. You got exactly what you asked for. You just did not realize you were asking for it. This harvesting strategy also solves another common problem that plagues zucchini growers, the problem of the hidden monster. You know the one. You check your plants every couple of days, and then one morning you lift a leaf and there it is. A zucchini the size of a small submarine that somehow escaped your notice and is now too seedy and tough to eat. When you harvest every day or every other day at the 6 to 8 inch mark, you are physically inspecting every square inch of every plant on a regular basis. Nothing hides from you. Nothing gets away. You are in control of the plant's output, not the other way around. And there is a secondary benefit here that I want to mention because it is important. Young zucchini, harvested at 6 to 8 inches, are simply better food. They are denser, sweeter, with a finer texture and a thinner skin. They do not need to be peeled or seeded. You can slice them raw into salads. You can grill them in minutes. You can saute them with nothing but olive oil and salt, and they will be delicious. The giant ones are impressive, and they have their uses, but the young ones are the real prize. By harvesting most of your crop at this ideal stage, you are eating the best possible version of the vegetable while also setting the stage for the giants. It is a win in every direction. Let me give you the exact numbers from my own garden last summer, so you can see what this 3-tip system actually produces in practice. I planted 6 zucchini plants, 3 of a standard black beauty variety, and 3 of a Romanesco costata, which is an Italian heirloom with deep ribs and exceptional flavor. I buried a reservoir pot next to each plant at transplant time, filled with the gravel and situated about 8 inches from the main stem. I hand-pollinated every morning from the first day female flowers appeared until the middle of September, missing maybe 5 days total when I was away, and my neighbor covered for me. I watered through the reservoir pots every other day, and fed with the fish emulsion and molasses mixture once a week. And I harvested ruthlessly, every single day, taking every fruit at 6 to 8 inches except for 2 per plant that I let run. The result? From those 6 plants, over a season that ran from late June through the first hard frost in October, I harvested just over 240 pounds of zucchini. That is 40 pounds per plant. The giants, the ones I let go, averaged between 3.5 and 5 pounds each, with the largest single fruit weighing in at just over 6 pounds. And the plants were still producing, still setting new fruit, when the frost finally killed them. They did not slow down in August. They did not succumb to powdery mildew until very late in the season, and even then, it was manageable. They just kept going, because they were never allowed to finish. I want to pause here and address the question I know is forming in your mind, because it is the same question I had when I first heard this advice. Is it really worth the effort? Hand-pollinating every single morning, burying pots, harvesting daily. That sounds like a lot of work for a vegetable that, let us be honest, is not exactly rare or expensive at the grocery store. And my answer is this. It is not about the zucchini. It is about what the zucchini represents. It is about the fact that we have been systematically taught, by a culture that wants to sell us solutions in bottles and bags, that growing food is complicated and difficult, and requires constant inputs that we have to buy. And it is simply not true. The 3 tips I have given you are not tricks or hacks. They are not shortcuts. They are simply the way zucchini was grown for centuries before the advent of synthetic fertilizers and hybrid seeds bred for shelf life, instead of flavor. Hand-pollination is what squash bees did before we paved over their habitat and sprayed insecticides that killed them. Deep root watering is what happens naturally when soil is healthy and full of organic matter that holds moisture and channels it downward. Ruthless harvesting is what any gardener who depends on their garden for food does instinctively, because they know that letting a plant go to seed means the end of the harvest. These are not new ideas. They are old ideas, almost forgotten, buried under decades of marketing that told us we needed more stuff to do what nature already knew how to do. Mrs. Kowalska passed away 2 years ago, at the age of 87. Her garden is gone now, replaced by a lawn by the new owners. But her zucchini plants, or rather the seeds from her zucchini plants, live on in my garden. She gave me a handful of seeds from her own saved stock, a variety she simply called grandmother's green, that she had been growing and selecting for over 50 years. They are not a named cultivar you can buy in a catalog. They are a landrace, adapted to our specific climate and soil, selected over generations for vigor and flavor and productivity. I grow them every year, and every year I save the seeds from the best plants, just as she taught me. And every time I hand-pollinate a female flower, I think of her. Not in a sentimental, misty-eyed way, but in a practical, hands-in-the-dirt way. I think about the chain of knowledge, grandmother to granddaughter, neighbor to neighbor, that kept this simple, effective method alive while the rest of the world was busy buying bloom boosters and calcium sprays. And I think about how close we came to losing it entirely. How many other pieces of quiet, practical wisdom have already been lost because nobody thought they were worth writing down or because they could not be packaged and sold. So here is what I want you to do. Try this. Try all 3 tips, exactly as I have described them, on just one zucchini plant this season. Just one. You do not need to overhaul your entire garden or change everything you do. Plant one zucchini, bury a reservoir pot next to it, commit to hand-pollinating every morning for 30 seconds, and harvest every fruit at 6 to 8 inches, except for one that you let run. See what happens. I am confident, truly confident, that you will be amazed. And when you are standing in your kitchen holding a zucchini the size of your forearm, I want you to tell someone. Tell your neighbor. Tell your friend who is frustrated with their garden. Tell your kid. Pass it on. That is how this knowledge survives. Not through YouTube videos or gardening books, as helpful as those can be, but through people face to face showing each other what works. That is the real secret, the one that no company can ever sell you and no algorithm can ever suppress. The knowledge is free. It always has been. We just have to remember to share it. If this was helpful to you, if you are going to try these tips in your garden this year, let me know in the comments. Tell me what variety you are growing, what your goal is, whether you are chasing giants or just want a reliable harvest. I read every comment, and I try to answer as many as I can. And if you know someone who is struggling with their zucchini plants, someone who is doing everything the internet tells them and still getting small, sad fruits, send them this video. It might just change their summer. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of practical, tested, no-nonsense gardening advice. I do not have any products to sell you, no courses, no branded fertilizers. I am just a gardener who has made a lot of mistakes and wants to help you avoid making the same ones. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the garden.